Welcome into King Josiah TV. This is the live stream, our weekly podcast. Welcome in, guys. Thank you guys for staking tuned into the show this week. Let's go ahead and get it rolling. Welcome, guys, in again to King Josiah TV, where this channel was created to educate, promote, and influence the kingdom of Jesus Christ in this world. I am your host, Josiah. And before we get started, guys, I need you to do me a favor. I ask you every time. If you're listening on YouTube, go ahead and smash the subscribe button. If you're listening audibly on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, go ahead and hit that follow button. Guys, let's go ahead and roll right into today's show.
Watch giants fall like Goliath. David, I dance. This ain't no tick-tock. God told me that my steps was ordered. Walking in flip-flops. Chris Rock, how they laughed at me.
All right, guys, this is EP number 28. Thank you guys again for everybody that's tuning in, everybody that stayed along this whole time. I very much appreciate you, all the loves, the likes, everything. I don't know if you guys noticed this precursor before we get into today's show. Last week I was not able to post on YouTube the separate segments of the show due to some copyright issues of the last show and some of the Joe Rogan stuff that we covered. So I'm going to be dropping a little bit of that this week. They stopped me from posting, so that's kind of why none of the shorter form videos of last week's podcast came out. I know some of you enjoy that content, guys, but let's go ahead and roll into today's show without further ado. The first thing we're going to cover is actually going to be Wes Huff again. I know we talked about him last week, but he was recently on the PBD podcast, I believe is the name of it. And he was on there talking simply because he had his recent debate with Billy Carson. So he's been going around. He's been on a few big podcasts. His social media has completely exploded since then. I mean, he has people from all different type of areas and places trying to debate him now and trying to come at him. But I thought that him and the PBD podcast had a good conversation. They talked on some things about that, but there were some other things that he touched on pertaining to Christianity in the world today and how its reach is and what it's meant to be or where the reach is supposed to go and how it is maybe progressing or not progressing. So let's go ahead and listen in, guys. I'm going to go ahead and bring this up on the screen.
It's allowed, but having more kids. And so you have more kids and you have a system that allows for certain things. And so that's going to grow faster than a society which is dissuading families from growing, is maybe even demonizing the growth of a household for various reasons, whether that be, political or environmental or otherwise. And so you just have very different worldview foundations for something like Christianity than you do for something like
Do you
Islam.
think the world's a better placed based on one faith or the other? Meaning, when you're speaking with Muslims, there is a pride for them to, we're going to outgrow you and we're going to be the dominant religion in the world. And, it's going to be the way we run things. Cities like right now with what's going on with UK, I don't know if you're following the challenges that UK is going through, where the most common name given, 30%, I think, I don't know what it was, the most common name given to kids in 2024 was Mohammed. And this is UK, right? You're talking about. Do you think Christians, the goal is to what? In your mind, is it, if the faith that we have today, it's the same it was yesterday.
And that's a crazy statistic, guys, to see. I mean, if I'm being honest, I wasn't even aware of this, but I'm not surprised or caught surprised by this because, again, in the last days, God said there will be a great falling away. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to go for other religions and other things that simply are demonic and not of God. These things they do seem, these other religions seem more appealing. These other religions aren't as sacrificial as Christianity is. And another thing I think is a bad point on Christian side, which I can say this is our own fault, is that we have watered down the gospel. We've watered down what we believe in to the point to where we seem a little wet behind the ears compared to some other religions and soft compared to other religions, and other people from the outside look and just think Christians are punks. Christians, they stand for nothing. They let anything go, which is a lot of Christians and a lot of Christian churches look like that.
It's the same. It's going to be 100 years from now, where some criticism may be like, well, look, the Christianity, the church is getting smaller. Some data that we have, if you want to pull it up, you see this with Pew Research, and they'll show it and say, well, here's what's going on. And, it used to be church attendance used to be higher. I don't know how many mega churches in America are empty today. And I've gone to many of them, and you name them. I've been to a lot of mega churches in America today, because you're going places like, I want to see how this guy preaches. I want to see how that guy preaches. I want to see what this is like. Wait a minute. Why is this so empty here? Why did we build a facility that's a $50 million facility, but 80% of the place is empty? Why did you build this place? You think on one side, one religion is growing and the other one isn't. Like, this is a number right here. If you're looking
I'm really
from
interested
1940 church members.
I'm really interested in what Wes says, because some of the statistics that they're bringing up, again, these are real facts. Again, a lot of people are beginning to walk away from church. I know people that I grew up with, people that grew up in the faith, or adults, people that I looked up to that were Christians, believers, whatever you want to call it, that even taught me things biblically, that are now completely walking away from Christianity. And one, it's a telling of the times. And again, Christianity has become watered down, and I believe it's not as effective because of that.
Memberships amongst U.S. adults, 73, 76, 73. So we're around 70% for about 45 years. Then it drops, still at 70% in 2000. But in the last 20 years, 70, 64, 61, 57, 55, 50, 47. And I don't know what that number is today. Why do you think this is happening?
So I think we do need to be careful with the statistics, because we used to live in a culture that was much more culturally Christian than it is today. And sometimes I look at these numbers and I often wonder, okay, yes, you see this kind of downward trajectory, but I wonder, I mean, in Canada, in not that long ago, only a few decades ago, you had something like the Lord's Day Act, where you were not allowed to have a...
I mean, that's an amazing point that Wes brings up. We live in a country now that we have Christian values and Christian standpoints, but we don't necessarily have a Christian society. People don't live a Christian life. People don't walk that path. People are living complete opposite. But when you have a government that was built on Christian values, it starts to rub against the people that are living complete opposite. Yes, that was America's foundation, but that is no longer what we are. I mean, if you're speaking of America singularly, I mean, other nations and stuff, that's a whole different conversation. But
a business open on Sunday because it was the Lord's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just more of a cultural zeitgeist that was not necessarily, I think, Christian it was Christian out of convenience, not Christian out of conviction. And so I think a lot of people used to go to church because maybe they were just following along in the society, and that's just part of what you did. And the culture shifted, and now the culture is not saying that going to church is necessarily something that you should do or need to do. And so I'm always curious as to how many of these people who used to, fill out the little tick box and say, I'm a Christian, I go to church on Sunday, how many of them were doing so because it was just par for the course for their culture, and the culture shifted and
I mean, that's something to think about. A lot of people, again, they were just raised in a home, in a society where being Christian was cool. Like when I was growing up in the 90s, and there was, in the early 2000s, being a Christian was the normal thing. Being a Christian, I mean, all of my friends from school, everybody, if you were something else, you're almost looked at funny. You got made fun of if you were something else. Everybody went to church. You know what I mean? It was the norm. But when you've got kids that were raised that way from the 90s, the 80s, and so on and so forth, and these new generations of kids, they're living a place where it's not necessarily forced on them. It's not necessarily the norm anymore. They start walking away from it, and then you get what you have now, where going to church and being a believer is not necessarily the cool thing to do anymore.
Weren't really necessarily convictionally Christian then, and they were following the stream of the flow of the culture, and the stream of the flow shifted. And so now it's just more culturally accepted to not go to church. And so I wonder whether the people who are going to church now are actually those that choose to go to church convictionally and are what you would refer to as the actual Christians. that feel that conviction that Jesus is their Lord and Savior.
You know what I would say to that? So in the insurance company I built, we're a high volume recruiting insurance agency. And we grew from 60 agents to 60,000 agents.
Mm.
And I knew when I went to an office, they used to have 100 agents coming to meetings on Saturdays, okay, or Tuesday nights. And then I'd come back a year later and they're down to 20. And I would say, hey.
We are the Skaggs family, Matthew and Cosette.
Year ago, you guys had 100, Splits was fired up. Now you're down to 20. And then I would see the broker running the office, let's just say he's the senior pastor, he would say, well, it's not about quantity, it's about quality.
Mm.
We have quality attendees, where a year ago we didn't have quality.
That's true. And that's one thing that I will say about the church now. The church has been, and I believe God is weeding out the wheat from the tare. He's separating true Christians from people that are they just wear the name badge Christian. They're not truly walking it out. They're not walking in the gifts of the Holy Spirit. They're not, praying, fasting, reading, and meditating on their word day and night. They're just going to church. God is weeding those out. And I think, again, he has a point that we have more quality now. And I believe that God's getting to that point where he just wants a quality church. He doesn't want a giant church. He doesn't want the biggest church. He wants a quality church and people that are truly seeking after him and truly have a heart for God, that aren't just in the church just because society tells them or just because it's the norm, but no, they're truly servants of the Most High.
Yeah. We had quantity. I'm solving for quality. And it was always, for me, a sign of lack of enthusiasm in the leader, lack of conviction in the leader, lack of aggressiveness and assertiveness to go out there and baptize, bring people in and baptize them later. Bring them in and share the story with them. Share the testimony of what we've done, how this business works, why it's effective. And I'll go to a church and I'll see a fired up pastor at the top, and you notice, boom, wall to wall. Good for you, right? But, and I hear what you're saying. Because I don't think the same can be said about the Mormon church. I think Mormonism is growing. When you look at their data, they're doing. And by the way,
I'm not convinced about that.
Well, you can say that, but data, when it's shown to me.
Sure.
And let me tell you where I'm going with this. You're talking to a guy that's a evangelical, non-denominational. You're a Baptist, right? Yep. And I think it'd be good. One of our guys asked the question, say, hey, can you tell me?
I didn't actually know that. That is new to me. I did not know Wes was Baptist. Not that it's a problem, but I didn't realize he was Baptist. Was kind of explain some of his thought points and some of his things as he said in his podcast with Joe Rogan. That kind of makes things make a little bit of sense. That I'm non-denominational. But
made a difference between Presbyterian and Orthodox. And I said, I'm going to ask Wes. So I think that's a good thing for you to break down, but I'll go there in a minute. But let's just kind of stay on this topic here. It's just kind of where I'm going to here right now. Andrew Tate and I are speaking. And I'm sure you know who Andrew Tate is.
Mm-hmm. Very controversial dude.
A year and a half ago, he gets out of jail. I'm there, the first person to interview him. He had an issue with BBC. We're sitting there talking. And he says, when I was in jail, I decided to convert to being a Muslim, religion of Islam. Okay.
You guys know him. He's
tell me
on another level.
I don't know if you know his reason or not. Have you heard his reason?
I have heard him articulate.
And he says, when I was there, how many Christian friends of mine and fans wrote me a letter? None. Do you know how many Muslims wrote me a letter? I can't even tell you. And to me, when I saw that, boom. Okay. So while we're talking, I'm writing this thing down. And I'm writing why people convert, because I'm actually curious. So this wasn't prepared. I'm literally, when you're talking, I'm writing this stuff down while we're having a conversation. Why do people convert to Christianity or Muslim or Jehovah or Seventh Day or Mormonism or Scientology or whatever it may be, right? And I've been through all of these guys. I used to go debate Scientologists all the time to know what they're thinking about, right? In LA at their main Scientology center. So one is through your example, testimony, the way you live. Like you showed grace with Billy Carson.
And that goes back to what I was saying. Some plant, some sow, but God brings the increase. They're watching you. They're watching everything we do. And sometimes that's the difference between somebody become a Christian or someone not, or someone using you as an excuse to not become a Christian because you treated them a certain way, because you conducted yourself a certain way. A lot of these things play a role.
I walked away and I said, my son should watch this guy because men would benefit from having grace, especially when you can be a bully and you show grace. That's even more honorable. Right? When somebody knows how to fight and beat you up and they don't, and they say, look, it's just not a good idea. Look, can we not fight? And walks away. You know this guy can whoop this guy's tail, but he doesn't. That's grace. Good for you, right? Versus, God, let me go beat him up, show him the fact that I know Taekwondo or whatever. So to me, one is example testimony. Okay? Was that set there for Andrew? I don't know. Two, the actual content. What's in the book of Quran? What's in the book of, what's in the Bible? What's in the book of Moroni? What's in L. Ron Hubbard's, what's the book called? Dynamic.
And the part about our problem about this is a lot of people don't read the Bible all the way through. A lot of people aren't going to read the Quran. A lot of them are forced. It's mandatory that they do be able to recite certain things over time. But the Bible isn't something that it's mandatory, or a lot of churches will send you through things to learn it. A lot of times you have to learn that on your own. And most people don't read it. Most Christians have never read the entire Bible, and been Christians over 20, 30 years.
Right? I've found in my experience, less than 10% of the time is the content, because most people don't read the Bible. Most people don't read the whole book.
Well,
it's the example, somebody in their lives. Third one I wrote down is disappointment, heartbreak, hurt. Hey, you hurt me. You were.
I mean, that's right on point there, guys. That is exactly what I always say. And I was telling my wife this the other day. When you present people the gospel, it's never an intellectual issue most of the time. It's not an issue of facts. It's not an issue of proving them wrong or disproving what they've already believed or what they've found to be true. Most of the time, it's a heart issue, not necessarily a fact issue. That's why, again, when it comes to certain people, you've got to present them with the truth. Allow them and allow God to do his work on them and walk away. It's not your job to make them a Christian. So again, this goes back to, the whole premise of partially why I created this podcast, again, was to influence the world on common things that the world is already talking about, already having conversations over, and being an ambassador in the world and showing a different influence that most people don't hear Christians talk on these things. Most people don't hear Christians talk on world topics. We have a say on these. We have an opinion on these things. But if they think our opinion is only one viewpoint and no one's talking on it, they're only going to see Christians from this minute perspective. So I'm glad that they had that conversation. Thank you guys again for listening and staying along for today's podcast, guys. This is episode 26 of the King Josiah TV podcast. If you're listening on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you haven't hit the like button yet, go ahead and hit the like button. If you're listening audibly on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, go ahead and hit the follow button. Guys, thank you guys again for paying attention, and I'm going to see you guys next week.
But my salvation on me like it's a helmet. The way you to sin is death for send you to hell quick. Wanted to be all about me, God, I was selfish. I was